Once again, traveler, thank you for listening. I would like to apologize for the delay. This video is much longer than the previous uploads, and it was more of an undertaking than I had expected. There are a few spots where the voiceover, for some unknown reason, just would not take. I hope this doesn't serve to break immersion too much, and I am so very sorry for the inconvenience. I hope none of you are too miffed. Please enjoy. The shot rang out. The lights died. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the dark and the ringing in my ears. Then something hit me. Hard. I crashed against the wall, pain lancing up my spine as a weight bore down on me. Hands, no fingers, pressed against my arms. Too long, too many. My breath hitched as something cold skittered along my ribs. Murphy shouted. I heard Patel cursing. I kicked out, connected with something, and the weight lifted. Scrambling, I reached for my helmet's controls. My fingers shook, but I found the switch. The headlamp blazed to life. Murphy's light flicked on a second later. The corridor flared in harsh white beams, the shadows scattering like cockroaches. I swung my pistol up, scanning. The thing was gone. But Holloway was on the floor, writhing.
Shit! Captain?
Murphy was already moving, kneeling beside him. Patel's light darted over us, searching the hallway.
Where the hell did it go?
I wasn't listening. My stomach had turned inside out. Holloway was gripping his side, his breath ragged. Blood smeared his uniform, pooling under him in thick, dark ribbons. I looked closer. The wound, the bullet hole. My bullet hole. I staggered back. No, that's not... I looked up at Murphy, at Patel, panic scraping my throat raw. Tell me you saw it. My voice cracked. Tell me you saw the thing I shot. Murphy's eyes flicked to Patel. Patel didn't say anything. I clenched my jaw. No, you saw it. It was standing right there. Right where... My words caught in my throat. Right where Holloway was now. But that wasn't possible. It wasn't. Murphy shook his head.
We have to move. Come on. We get him back to the ship. Get him patched up and figure this shit out later.
Patel and I didn't argue. We hauled Holloway up, his weight sagging between us. His breath came in sharp, pained gasps. And then Patel said,
Where's the airlock?
I looked up. The hallway stretched ahead of us, empty. Wrong. The airlock was gone. We stopped moving. Murphy turned in a slow circle, headlamp cutting through the red haze. His voice was hoarse when he said,
It was right here.
We all stood there, breathing hard, listening to the ship groan around us. It had moved. Or we had.
Bridge.
Murphy said suddenly, voice sharp.
If something's fucked with the airlock, maybe we can get answers from the command logs.
I nodded. Go! Murphy hesitated, eyes flicking to Holloway, but Patel and I had him. He gave one last look down the corridor, like he didn't want to turn his back on it, then sprinted off toward the bridge. We dragged Holloway toward medical. The medbay was sterile, untouched by time. White walls, stocked cabinets, everything neatly in place. It made my skin crawl. I set Holloway on the table, Patel helping me strip away his uniform. The wound was bad, but not deadly, not yet. The bullet had gone through clean, but the bleeding needed to be stopped. I moved on instinct. Security officers had to be trained in field medicine, and my hands knew what to do, even as my brain screamed at me. Holloway barely made a sound as I worked. His eyes were open, watching me. There was something wrong in them, but I didn't look too close. I stitched, I sealed, I stabilized, then my comm crackled.
Crowe.
Murphy's voice. I pressed my earpiece. Go? There was static. Then, "I need you to see this." Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. Patel and I shared a look. I turned to Holloway, who was breathing easier, but still pale as hell. "Stay with him," I said. Then I went to the bridge. The view screen was on. Murphy stood in front of it, stiff as a board. I followed his gaze. I wished I hadn't. Outside the red wake, past the metal ribs of the docking bay, there should have been another ship. There should have been the Calypso. But there wasn't. Just empty space. Cold. Black. Endless. I swallowed hard. "Tell me this is a glitch." Murphy didn't look at me. His hands clenched at his sides.
It's not.
I stared out at the void where our ship should have been. My mouth was dry. We were alone. The silence stretched. Murphy and I stood there, staring at the void where the Calypso should have been. The stars beyond the red wake blinked cold and distant, uncaring. I forced myself to breathe. Run a diagnostic. Maybe the view screen is...
It's not the fucking view screen.
Murphy's voice was low, tight.
I checked external sensors. There's nothing out there. No beacon, no hull signature, no ship.
I shook my head. That doesn't make sense.
Nothing about any of this shit makes sense.
I turned away from the screen, rubbing at my face. My mind raced, searching for an explanation, any explanation that wasn't the one clawing at the edges of my thoughts. The airlock was gone. The Calypso was gone. We were alone. Unless... I looked at Murphy. Did the logs say anything? Murphy exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck.
There's a partial recording.
He stepped to the console, fingers moving over the controls. A garbled audio file crackled to life over the bridge speakers. The voice was familiar.
This is Captain Holloway of the...
Static swallowed the rest then.
Request immediate assistance. We have...
Another burst of static, layered over with something else, a sound just below human hearing, like a whisper in the bones. Then a different voice, a voice that wasn't Holloway.
"You were never meant to leave."
The file cut off. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Murphy was staring at me, his face pale.
Crowe?
He said, voice barely above a whisper.
Tell me you heard that.
I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Something shifted behind us. Not a sound, not a movement, just the overwhelming sense that we were no longer alone on the bridge. Slowly Murphy and I turned. The shadows pooled near the far console, deeper than they should have been. Something was in them, shifting just outside the reach of our headlamps. Then it stepped forward. It had no face, no eyes, no mouth. Just the suggestion of a head, smooth and featureless like melted wax. Its limbs were too long, fingers tapering into fine points, moving in slow, deliberate motions, like it was reaching for something. For us. Murphy made a choked sound. I grabbed his arm and ran. We sprinted through the corridors, the emergency lights flickering in and out. The ship groaned around us. The walls breathed. Murphy kept looking over his shoulder, his breath ragged.
It's following us.
He gasped. I didn't look. I could feel it. The hallways twisted ahead, unfamiliar, shifting. We took a left, then a right, and somehow ended up in the same corridor we'd started in. The ship was moving us. A whisper slid past my ear. I turned my head. A face. Not mine. Not Murphy's. Something warped, frozen in a silent scream, shifting just beneath the metal walls. I fired. The gunshot roared, the flash illuminating. Nothing. The face was gone. Murphy grabbed my shoulder, yanking me forward.
Keep moving.
We reached the medical bay, bursting through the doors. Patel jumped to his feet, eyes wide.
What the fuck happened?
I barely heard him. My hands were shaking. I looked at Holloway. His breathing was steadier, but his skin was too pale. His eyes cracked open, fixing on me. Then he smiled. Not a human smile. Not a natural one. It was too wide. "Crowe," Murphy said. His voice shook.
I don't think that's Holloway.
The lights flickered. The air shuddered. Then the alarms began blaring. Patel rushed to the console, his face drained of color.
You guys are gonna want to see this.
The view screen flickered to life. Outside, past the docking bay where the Calypso had been, there was something else now. A shape, a presence. Dark, writhing, pulsing against the void. Watching us. Waiting. And then, over the ship's speakers, the voice came back. Software almost gentle.
You were never meant to leave.
The alarms wailed, the ship groaned, and Holloway started laughing. A slow, wet chuckle bubbling up from his throat like something crawling its way free. He sat up on the medical bed, peeling away the bandages I'd just wrapped around him. His skin rippled. Maniacally, Holloway said,
Is he just as funny as the first one as the
he
first
said, his
time?
voice stretching wrong, warping, doubling, as if another voice spoke beneath his own. Murphy backed away. Patel froze, fingers still hovering over the console. I didn't move. I couldn't. Holloway rolled his shoulders, his grin splitting wider, too wide, until the skin at the edges of his mouth tore. But there was no blood, just darkness. Thick, oil-slick tendrils oozed from beneath his skin, unraveling him from the inside out. His eyes sank into his skull, his limbs lengthened. His uniform melted into the writhing black mass of his shifting body. Murphy swore under his breath.
Crowe.
I fired. The bullets punched through him, one after the other, his chest, his throat, his skull. Nothing. Holloway, the thing that used to be Holloway, tilted its head. The holes in its body closed like water swallowing a stone, and it stepped forward, right toward Patel. Patel stumbled back against the console, his breath shuddering.
Captain,
His voice cracked.
you in there?
Holloway didn't stop. He walked through him. The moment the black tendrils passed through Patel's body, his breath hitched. A sharp, wet gasp. Then he started peeling apart. A thin vertical line split him in two, starting at his forehead, running down between his eyes, through his nose, his lips, his throat, his chest. For a moment, he was still. Then he spoke. His voice came in two halves, staggered, overlapping, as his body pulled apart like paper.
Oh, I think I see it now.
His two halves slipped away from each other, organs spilling wetly to the floor. His eyes, both halves of them, rolled toward me. Then he hit the ground. Murphy made a strangled noise and bolted. I ran after him. We sprinted through the corridors, the walls breathing, the ship laughing. The lights flickered, and Patel's voice whispered through the comms.
Oh, I think I see it now.
Murphy screamed, yanking his earpiece out. I nearly did the same. The ship shifted around us. The halls no longer led where they should have. Doors appeared and disappeared, the walls stretching, contracting, alive, aware, hungry. Murphy slammed to a stop.
Crowe? Where the fuck are we going?
I didn't have an answer. Then, ahead of us, a door. An escape pod bay. Murphy didn't hesitate. He ran for it, slamming his fist against the panel. The door opened. Something waited inside. Tall. Wrong. Its featureless face turned toward us. It lifted one hand, long, tapering fingers stretching toward us. The door slammed shut on its own. Murphy and I stood there, panting, the alarms screaming around us, and then, from behind us, a voice, Holloway's, low, laughing.
You were never meant to leave.
Murphy and I ran until our legs burned, until the ship's twisting corridors spat us back onto the bridge. The door slammed shut behind us, locking with a heavy clunk. Murphy wheezed, bent over with his hands on his knees.
This is good.
He panted.
The bridge is good. We can figure something out.
I wasn't so sure. I turned to the console, searching for anything. A distress signal, a goddamn map, anything. But the system was locked in some kind of loop. The monitors flickered, showing static, showing our faces, showing the empty black beyond the ship. No stars, no planets, just the black hole. It loomed outside, watching. Murphy sank into the captain's chair, rubbing his temples.
Fuck, man. We just need to wait. Someone will come looking for us.
I stared at him. Wait for who? There was no one left. Time passed. We stopped checking the clocks after a while. There was no hunger, no thirst, no exhaustion. But there was time. Endless time. We sat in silence, watching the monitors, watching nothing. Murphy talked at first, wild theories, desperate plans, but eventually he stopped. His voice dried up. His eyes took on a distant, glassy look. I kept expecting him to start rotting, or for my own skin to peel away. But we remained, unchanged, trapped. At some point, maybe days, maybe years, I blinked. And when I opened my eyes, I wasn't on the bridge anymore. I was there, the red wake. But not like we'd found it. It was new. The metal gleamed, untouched by rust and time. The consoles glowed with bright green interface lights, the way they had before. I was strapped into a chair. My hands moved, not by my own will, but by something else, something outside me. My fingers danced over the controls, adjusting the thrusters, locking in coordinates. The crew bustled around me, my crew, except I didn't know them. Not their names, not their faces. And yet I did. I had always known them. The black hole wasn't there at first. The ship drifted through deep space, calm, ordinary. Then it appeared, not slowly, not naturally. One moment there was nothing. The next, a yawning mouth of darkness opened before us. A trap. The ship lurched. Proximity alarms screamed. The gravitational pull should have ripped us apart, but it didn't. It held us instead, suspended, like a fly caught in a web. A sick feeling crawled through me. Flashes, different versions of us, different uniforms, different faces, the same moment over and over again, hundreds, thousands. Each time we thought we were the first. Each time we struggled, fought, died. Each time we were dragged back, reset. I saw myself die, shot, eviscerated, left, screaming in the void. I saw Murphy die, Patel die, Holloway die, or become something else. We had done this before, again, and again, and again. The black hole wasn't just a black hole. It was a mind, a thing that thought, a thing that played. And we were its game. I snapped back to the bridge, gasping. Murphy looked up, his face unreadable.
You okay?
I swallowed hard. Murphy. My voice came out raw. How long have we been here? Murphy's brow furrowed. Then he went still. His mouth opened, then closed. He didn't know. Neither did I. The ship laughed. Not through speakers, not through sound, but in my head, and I understood. We had never left. We would never leave. Time became meaningless. Murphy stopped speaking altogether. He just sat there, slouched in the captain's chair, staring at the blank screen. Every so often I'd catch his lips moving, but no sound came out. I kept talking, not to him, not to anyone. Just talking. I listed off old security procedures. I recited names I barely remembered. My mother's name, my sister's name. Did I have a sister? I counted the rivets in the floor. 167. No, 171. Wait. I counted again. 203. The ship shifted around us quietly, subtly, like a deck of cards being shuffled behind our backs. Murphy started writing. At some point, he pulled a knife from his belt and began carving into the armrest of the chair. Lines, circles, symbols, deep scratches that bled rust and flaked metal. I leaned closer. What are you doing? He didn't answer. His hand moved, automatic, carving, carving, carving. I put my hand on his wrist. Murphy? He finally looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with deep bruises. His pupils were blown wide. I shivered. How long has it been? I asked. Murphy just smiled. His teeth were too white. The ship whispered to me. I'd be looking at the console, at the void outside, and I'd hear it. Right at the edge of my skull. Little things at first, my name, a breath, a familiar voice. Then it started mocking me. Patel's voice, right in my ear.
Oh, I think I see it now.
I turned. He wasn't there. I started seeing things. At first, just flickers in my periphery. A shadow moving when Murphy was right there. A second reflection in the console's glass. Then shapes. Figures. The crew. The other versions of us. They stood in the corners of the bridge, watching. Their faces were wrong. Hollow, half-melted, stretched into yawning grins. Some had no eyes. Some had too many. One of them had my face. I didn't sleep. I don't think I could anymore. Murphy started talking again, but not to me. I caught him whispering to the console, tapping his fingers in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded like knocking. I reached out, grabbed his shoulder. Who are you talking to? He stopped. His hand stayed frozen in the air, like a puppet with its strings cut. Then he turned to me, smiled.
She's almost here.
There was a door on the bridge. There shouldn't have been a door on the bridge. I had walked past that wall 100 times. It had been solid metal. Now it wasn't. Now it was a door. Murphy stood in front of it, hand on the latch.
She's almost here.
he said again. I could hear knocking from the other side. The knocking grew louder. Murphy's hand tightened on the latch. "Murphy," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Step away from the door." He didn't. His head tilted just slightly. His fingers tensed. "The hell is wrong with you?" I took a step forward, reaching for him. "You open that door, we're dead." His breath hitched, like a stifled laugh.
You don't get it.
He whispered.
You still don't get it.
I grabbed his wrist, hard. Murphy lunged. He slammed into me, knocking us both sideways. My shoulder clipped the console. Pain shot up my arm. Then we were on the ground, rolling, punching, clawing. His fists cracked into my ribs. I gritted my teeth and shoved my knee into his gut, throwing him off balance. Murphy wasn't a big guy, but he fought like something else was in him, something old, something desperate. His nails raked across my face, catching my cheek. I got my hands around his throat. "Stop!" I snarled. "Murphy, stop!" His face twisted.
It's not real, Crowe.
He wheezed, eyes wild, lips curling into a grin.
This isn't real.
Then he threw his head forward, cracking his skull against mine. Pain exploded in my forehead. I lost my grip. Murphy scrambled up, lunged for the latch. The door swung open. The sound that followed wasn't sound at all. It was absence, a horrible, gaping silence. The bridge ripped apart. Loose debris, shattered screens, my pistol, everything went flying. Murphy's grin disappeared. For a split second, his expression snapped back, pure, wide-eyed terror. Then the void took him. His body whipped past me, arms flailing, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. Gone. Just gone. I barely had time to react. My feet left the floor. The air dragged at my skin, pulling. I threw my arms out, caught the edge of the console. My body snapped back like a flag in a storm. The pressure was unbearable. My fingers slipped. I reached with my free hand, fingers scrabbling at the emergency override. The ship laughed. The pressure grew worse. The vacuum howled around me. My vision blurred. I was losing. Then I hit the button. The airlock slammed shut. The force knocked me loose. I hit the ground hard, coughing, choking, gasping for air. Silence. Real silence. The air inside the bridge was still. The door was gone. Not closed. Gone. As if it had never been there in the first place. I lay on my back, staring up at the ceiling, my breath shaking. Murphy was gone and I was alone. And the damned ship laughed again. I hope you enjoyed this extended edition. I once again apologize for the issues I encountered during editing. I have started a Patreon to help afford a better quality editing software and better quality assets for dramatic use. If you want to help, go to patreon.com/Dreadsong the Bard or click the link in the description.